In this next section, we're going to move beyond some of those simple patterns of inheritance. We're going to talk about some of the ways that this genetic inheritance can become a little bit complicated. So for example, there are certain things like polygenic inheritance. There are things called polygenic traits that are controlled by actually multiple sets of alleles. So things like skin color or height, they are going to be controlled for by multiple they're controlled by multiple different alleles, multiple different genes and chromosomes. So what happens is that the effects of each dominant allele are going to be additive. And so we don't have just like, so when we've talked before about pea plants, we talked about tall versus short pea plants. We've talked about purple versus white flowers. Well, humans don't really function like that. Humans are not either dark or light. Humans are not tall or short. There's huge variations of everything in between. And what happens is if there are, so just for example, let's say that there are 10 different chromosomes or 10 different genes that code for height. Let's say that your mom has 4 genes for tall, 4 out of 10 genes for tall, and your dad has 5 out of 10 genes for tall. So it could be that your dad is of average height, your mom is of slightly below average height. But it could be that you receive 5 of your dad's genes for tall and 4 of your mom's genes for tall. And what you end up with is 9 genes for tall. You could end up substantially taller than either of your average parents. Same thing though, it could go both ways. If your dad has 5 genes for tall and your mom has 4 genes for tall, it could be possible that you get your dad's 5 genes for short plus 5 of your mom's genes for short. It could be that you end up with all genes for short, no genes for tall, and you could end up significantly smaller than your parents. So this is why height is sort of a continuous thing. Height is on a constant scale. Skin color is the same. It's on a continuous scale. There are over 100 different genes that influence skin color, and skin color is just simply the result of pigmentation produced by melanocytes, and can be influenced by things like sunlight in the environment. It can be influenced by the types of foods you eat. If you've ever noticed that, like, individuals who eat a lot of carrots can actually start to get sort of an orangish tint. There's a huge range of phenotypes that exist for each genotype. So here's just an example of the bell curve associated with height. Very few people are going to be extremely short or extremely tall. Most people are going to fall somewhere in a middling range. Same with skin color. Very few people are extremely light or extremely dark. Much more individuals are going to fall somewhere in this middle range. So those are polygenic traits. There are also multifactorial traits. These are traits that are controlled by polygenes that are subject to environmental influences. So yes, it's a polygene, or it's polygenic, it's controlled by multiple traits, but it's going to be significantly influenced by your environmental factors. So things like a cleft lip or cleft palate, clubfoot, schizophrenia, diabetes, allergies, cancers, a lot of cancers, as we've already talked about, are multifactorial traits where you may have there may be a genetic component, but that genetic component is going to be strongly influenced by environmental factors as well. Another really great example of this would be the coats of Himalayan rabbits. They are darker at the ears, nose, paws, and tails. And that's because those are the colder regions of the body. The enzyme that makes the melanin for that darker pigmentation is really only active at lower temperatures. Since their feet and their ears are the coldest parts of the body, that's going to be the region that has the darker pigmentation. So that's going to be multifactorial traits. These are going to be coded for by multiple genes, but they're also going to be strongly and heavily influenced by the environment. The next thing we want to talk about is pleiotropy. Pleiotropy is a little bit confusing, but what happens is that there's a single mutation. So only one mutation, but it's going to affect a lot of different seemingly unrelated traits. So we've already mentioned Marfan syndrome and how it is a dominant or an autosomal dominant disorder. But what happens is that Marfan syndrome, it's a mutation of only one gene, but it actually has a huge effect over the entire body. The skeletal system is going to experience chest wall deformities, very long fingers and legs, scoliosis, flat feet, long narrow face, loose joints. The eyes might see lens dislocation, severe nearsightedness. Lungs might collapse. You'll see stretch marks on the skin, recurrent hernias, dural ectasia, or just that's the stretching of the membrane that holds your spinal fluid in place. I'm sorry, I missed the heart and blood vessels. So you're going to see enlargement of the aorta, aneurysms of the aortic wall. You're going to see mitral valve prolapse. So this one disorder is going to affect the skeletal system, the cardiovascular system, your sensory systems, your respiratory system, your epithelial cells, your integumentary system, your skin. And the reason for this is because Marfan syndrome ultimately comes down to and affects connective tissues. All of these different structures, all of these different systems are held together in place by connective tissues. And so if we have a connective tissue defect, it's going to affect all of the different systems. We also want to talk briefly about incomplete dominance and codominance. Incomplete dominance, codominance are going to seem pretty similar. In the case of incomplete dominance, the heterozygote is going to be an intermediate between the two homozygotes. So, for example, if a curly-haired individual has children with a straight-haired individual, the children's hair is going to be wavy hair. So, incomplete dominance. There isn't going to be curly hair isn't more dominant than straight hair. Straight hair isn't more dominant than curly hair. You'll also see this incomplete dominance in flowers. If you cross a red flower with a white flower and end up with a pink flower, that's an example of incomplete dominance, where there isn't really one trait that's more dominant than the other. Codominance is going to seem very similar in that the alleles are equally expressed in a heterozygote. So great example of codominance would be blood type AB. So the red blood cells are going to have characteristics of both type A blood and type B blood. So both A and B is present. So just to kind of explain the difference between incomplete dominance and codominance. With the example of curly-haired individual, if curly hair was codominance with straight hair, what you would see is children who have locks of really curly hair and locks of really, really straight hair. The hair would have both curls and straight sections, as opposed to incomplete dominance, where you see something sort of halfway in between. So, yeah, there you go. Incomplete dominance is where you kind of see halfway of both traits, whereas codominance is you see a fullness of both traits being expressed. And we're going to actually talk quite a bit about ABO blood types, because it's going to make an appearance in a couple of other areas. So anyway, moving on, we're going to talk quite a bit about blood types and how that is a great example of codominance. Blood types are also an example of multiple allelic inheritance or multiple allelic traits. Multiple allelic traits just means that the trait is going to be controlled by multiple alleles. There are a lot of different forms. So there's not just tall versus short or curly versus straight. There's actually a lot of different possibilities. Each person is only going to have 2 of the possible alleles, but there could be more. So a great example of this, like I said, is ABO blood types. There's A blood type, B blood type, and O, and AB. So an individual is only going to have 2 alleles. You're either going to have an A allele, a B allele. You're going to have 2 alleles. They could be A, B, or I. O. I is just what we call it when you do not have that particular antigen. So there are 3 different alleles that are possible. You're only going to have 2 out of those 3 alleles. There are 2 possible genotypes for blood type A, 2 possible genotypes for blood type B. And we're going to look at that right here. So A and B are going to be fully expressed when they're together. This is an example of codominance. If you have an A allele and a B allele, you're going to have AB blood type. If you have an A allele and an A allele, you're going to have a phenotype, blood type A. If you have an A allele and a not allele, or an I allele, you're going to have blood type A. If you have a B allele and a B allele, you're going to have blood type B. If you have a B allele and an I allele, you'll have blood type B. Like I said before, if you have an A allele and a B allele, you'll have type AB. And if you have neither of those, if you have I allele and I allele, you're going to have a blood type of O. So like I said, A and B are going to be fully expressed when they're together. So if the person inherits one of each of these alleles, the person would have AB blood. Type O is going to result from having two I alleles, or two alleles that do not code for a particular antigen. So here is just an example of the inheritance of ABO blood types. In this example here, we have one parent who is a B type blood type and one who is type A. But in this case, both of these parents are heterozygous for their blood types. So this individual is going to be type B, or is going to be BI alleles, and this one is going to have an AI allele. If these two alleles cross, we're going to have an individual who is type AB. These two alleles cross, we're going to have an individual who is type B. If these two alleles cross, this individual will be type A, and it is totally possible that we have that these two alleles will cross, and we're going to have a type O. So in the case that we have two heterozygous parents, one who is type A, one who is type B, their odds of having offspring who are AB are 25%, odds of B, 25%, odds of A are 25%, and the odds of a type O child would be 25%. All right, so you should be able to detail why polygenic inheritance follows that bell-shaped curve. Explain what polygenic inheritance is, and why we don't necessarily see distinct phenotypes because of it. You should be able to describe multifactorial traits that are influenced by diet, nutrition, and environmental factors. And then, yes, although we didn't really get into it, this is a really great discussion question that I'd like you to think about and mull over, and that we could potentially talk about when we meet together is, what would be the potential evolutionary advantage of having multiple alleles for a given trait? All right, please let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns.